Good morning. How's everyone doing today? Come on, you're going to have to do better than that. It's hard to be up here with the lights. You can't see anything. Good morning. How's everyone doing today? All right. Thank you. Great. So thanks for taking a few minutes to chat here with me today. My name is Frederic Kerrest. I'm the co-founder, executive vice chairman, chief operating officer of a public enterprise software company called Okta. We started 11 years ago, so that means that I was you 11 years ago. I was much taller and better looking. These things happen. It's what happens when you're working hard. You're creating shareholder value every day. So I thought that it might be helpful to talk a little bit about some of the things that we went through, some of the things that I think might be practical advice that you can use as you think about where you're going, what you're doing, what's going to happen to you next, how you're going to build a great company, which I know you're all here to do and have big plans for, which is great. Let's see, when we started Okta 10 years ago, there was 2 of us. Today, there's about 2,300 employees. Obviously, $0 of revenue at the time. Today, it's about a $600 million revenue business, growing about 50% year over year. We've been public on NASDAQ for about 3 years. Market cap is something north of $15 billion. We have about 7,500 enterprise customers. So if you'd given me all those numbers 10 years ago when we started and said that's where you're going to get in 10 years, I would have taken that in a heartbeat, obviously. But given kind of what I've seen and where I've come from, I think the future for our company is very, very bright. That being said, you don't get here by showing up one day and then 10, 11 years later being like, okay, here's the business. I know what you're all going through. You're all going through building a company, doing a lot of hard work. And as much time as I spend today working with our large enterprise customers and public markets and all the rest of it, I still get to spend a lot of time like you all as entrepreneurs. And I think the jobs that you all have is a great job. I think it's the best job in the world. And as our company gets bigger and bigger, I'm always trying to find ways that I can keep that energy up and that I can work with entrepreneurs more closely. I started a venture capital arm of Okta last year called Octa Ventures. It's about a $50 million fund. We've made about 4 or 5 investments already out of that fund, and it's largely around startups that are focused on security, identity, privacy, things obviously that are very relevant to Okta and to our customers, just so we can see a little bit of some of the things that are happening there in the market. But in particular, one of the things that it's really been great for me is I get to spend more and more time with entrepreneurs and founders of small technology companies that are trying to grow. It gives me the opportunity to remember where I was and what it was like when it happened to me. And I know that it's not always a glorious time, but I think that it's hard to get very tactical, practical advice. So one thing I always try and do when I have a meeting with an entrepreneur is say, hey, what are 3 things that you specifically want to find out about? It could be about your sales comp plans. It could be about organizational structures. It could be about how you're going to raise your next round of financing, how you create the dynamics that you need to raise money. It could be any of these things. One thing I'm going to talk about today in particular, though, is team and some of the things that I think are most important in the team, in particular as you get going. And this is good information in hindsight. Like, I wish I'd known this 10 years ago, or I wish I could go back in time and tell myself this 10 years ago. So as I was coming here today, I said, well, what's going to be valuable for these folks? What's going to be valuable, hopefully, is something they can walk out of the room with and say, hey, that's something I learned that I can use tomorrow on wherever I am in my journey. So there was a great guy named David Morgenthaler. He was an alum. We were fellow alums of a university, and unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago. But he was one of the folks who started the venture capital business in the late 1960s. He started a firm called Morgenthaler Ventures in Ohio, of all places, but that's where he was from. And I got to spend a little bit of time with him in his later years, and he taught me a few things. And there was one analogy in particular that I thought was very, very relevant. And it was about what makes, he'd invested over time in hundreds and hundreds of companies. He kind of went back and looked at, like, what is the good data that shows where he should be investing, which means for us as entrepreneurs, like, what should we be doing? What should we be focused on? Because that's going to be the most successful outcome possible. And so he kind of broke it down into this very simple, and sometimes simple is the best, 70-20-10 approach to life. So 70% of your success is the market. Okay? You want to be in a very big market. You want to be in a growing market. It's very hard if you're going into a large market that's not growing. If you want to go and beat up on Intel and AMD to create new chip manufacturing when that whole business is going 3% a year and you need to invest billions and billions of dollars in a factory up front to get going, that's going to be hard. But if you're in a Large market that's growing very fast where the incumbents are having a hard time changing could be, in my case, obviously enterprise software, enterprise cloud computing, enterprise security cloud computing. That's a great place to be. It's a big market, it's growing fast, the incumbents can't move very fast, and that's a huge opportunity for you as a startup, as an entrepreneur with a small team that can move very fast. So the good analogy that he gave me was, he said, hey, it's like a horse race. No surprise, right? He was from Ohio. It's like a horse race. You want to play in the biggest market possible. 70% of it is the market. You want to play at the Kentucky Derby. You want to have the opportunity to win the biggest horse race possible, because even if you come in second or third at the Kentucky Derby, it's still going to be a very big outcome. Much better than if you were first at your local racetrack, right? The second part of it was, second part of the success was around product. And it was 10% product. Now, in his analogy, which I think is actually pretty good for all of you who are not jockeys in the room, he compared them to the jockeys. And he said, look, they wear brightly colored outfits. They think they're super important. But the reality of it is they're a little bit interchangeable. Again, if you're a jockey, I apologize. I'm just telling you that's David Morgenthaler's approach to life. Now, what does that mean? That means that if you don't get your product exactly right, once you get out there and you do a bunch of product market fit and you talk to a bunch of customers, you can always pivot it a little bit and change it a little bit. In fact, that's what we did at Okta. Everyone thinks that the Okta story was up and to the right and everything's been a home run and all you read in the press is how fantastic we are, and of course we are very, very fantastic. But there was plenty of changes as well. This is actually a screenshot, or not even a screenshot, it's a mock-up of one of the first products that we were planning to build in 2009. And we built an identity and access management company, so we focus on authentication, strong authentication, multi-factor authentication. We focus on customer-facing properties. We focus on internal-facing properties. This was a completely different business. Not completely different, but pretty different. And the insight that we'd had that we thought would be valuable was, my co-founder and I were working at Salesforce.com at the time, 15 years ago. We talked to a lot of large customers, and they said, hey, I want the same insight into how my services are running in the cloud as on-prem. So basically, give me a bunch of operations management interfaces so I can see the performance of these things. So we said, okay, great. So we drew this up. Then I went out and I talked to about 100 prospects, VPs of IT, directors of IT, or managers of IT, frankly, anyone in IT who would talk to me. And they said, well, that's interesting, but that's like the fourth problem. I said, oh, that's good. Well, what's the first problem? They said, the first problem is users. Can't control the users, can't control the systems. It's a mess. We have no idea who has access to what. So we actually changed from this first product into what became Okta later on, right? So that 10% product, if you're paying very close attention to what's going on with your customers, you can make that change. The 20% that I want to talk about, which I think is the most relevant here to this group, is the team, right? And this is your horse to ride. This is a picture of us looking really, really sharp on the day that we went public, April 7th, 2017. And, it's all about the team. It's all about the folks that we have there, but it's not just the employees that we had. It's the partners, the customers, the vendors. A number of our investors are there, a number of our advisors, both legal and tax and everything else. They're all there because it's the whole team that you put together, and that's how you get there. And the team is the key part. All of you, in my business, I spend north of 60 cents of every dollar on people. How do I hire, attract, retain, develop, grow the best people in the world? And so you really have to focus on people. I don't have any heavy machinery. I don't have any factories. Some of you might, but most of you probably don't. So you're in the people business. So you really got to focus on people. And when you think about people, how do you get that awesome team together? It's a lot about values. And I give this credit to my co-founder, who is still slightly taller than I am, but not as good looking because we all have our things. And he really said we need to talk a lot about culture, and we need to talk a lot about values when we get going, when we think about when we have 10 people, 20 people, 40 people. Remember, today we have over 2,000 people. We have 25 people join the company every week. So now it's a completely different program, although not that different because you still want to instill the same values. But we started very early writing down the values. And the values are basically the agenda of how you're going to run the company, right? It's the principles that are going to govern what you do. It is how you're going to behave. It's not about what you say, it's about what you do. It's about how you act. And as you get going and as you hire more and more folks, people are going to say, well, how do we behave at your company? How do we act? What do we do? And so what I encourage you to do is think about the values that you actually want to do and write them down. Take out a piece of paper later today, when you get home, tomorrow, next day, and write down the values that you want to have. These are actually our values. They've changed a little bit over the years, but not that much. At first, we had 7 of them, but then people told me they couldn't remember 7 things, which I thought was amazing. So we shortened it to 4, and then I was told that 4 was not enough. So now we have 5, and 5 seems like the right number for us. I don't know. You know, your mileage may vary. So these are the 5 corporate values that we have at Okta. They have not changed over the last, I call it 5 years maybe. They're very important. We talk about them all the time. We try and behave that way. As a leader, people are going to look to you, so you got to lead from the front. These are mine. Yours might be different. That's okay. But think about what you want them to be and make sure that you're behaving that way. And make sure that as you hire and you look to hire leaders, you look to hire executives, you look to hire managers, you ask them to do that as well. And you should, you know, always, when things aren't going that well, you want to take people aside and give them some more critical feedback. That's fine. In public, when people are doing these kinds of things and espousing the cultural values that you want, you should highlight that. You should say, this is the kind of behavior we're looking for. Congratulations to you. You did exactly what we were trying to do in this kind of tough situation. And why is that? That's because as you hire more managers and as they hire folks and as your company grows, more and more things are going to be done not by you. It's going to be done by other people. And at least you want a similar operating system where everyone understands what they're doing and how they should be doing it, and that you're all reading from the same page. So that's my big takeaway for all of you. I know there's going to be a lot of information going on here through the day. I put together, I know that it's hard to be in your seats. And I know that when I was building Okta, people always used to tell me, hey, you know, every time you go to a startup event, people would say, how's it going? You'd ask someone, how's it going? And everyone is crushing it. They're always crushing it all the time, except you. And you go home, you're like, I'm not crushing it. My product doesn't work. I can't hire anyone. I'm running out of money. Well, guess what? No one's actually crushing it any of the time. And it's a little-known secret, but I'm here to let you in on it. So I started getting a lot of questions from people, and I understand why the media works this way. It's a barbell. Media has to sell information. They have to sell stories. So they sell either massive successes, like Jeff Bezos and Steve Jobs, or they sell absolute train wrecks. Pick your favorite. But they don't talk about what happens in the middle, which is what happens to most of us most of the time. 99% of entrepreneurs, 99% of the time. So I had this idea. I started talking to a couple of my investors, Mark Andreessen, Ben Horowitz, and Neil Bushry, and I said, hey, will you guys come and talk with me? I never intended to be a podcaster. I'm not a podcaster. I accidentally happen to have a podcast that's done well. And I said, will you come and talk on this little show with me? We'll record it, your biggest train wrecks, so that everyone else knows that this is what happens to most people most of the time. And they did. And it became a show called Zero to IPO. We did season 1 last year. There's 12 episodes. You can go and listen to a lot of very successful technology entrepreneurs who built large companies that you all admire tell you about the most amazing stories when things were not working. They couldn't sell a customer. They were running out of money. Their product wasn't working. They were getting sued. They were going bankrupt. They couldn't go public. You name it. The stories are amazing. Hopefully, if you're sitting at home, you'll learn a couple things. We tried to make it educational. So like, here's actually 3 or 4 takeaways, like those cultural values you can write down. But also, hopefully, it'll let you know you're not alone. Okay? You all have the best job in the world. It can be a lonely place. It was a very lonely place for me for a long, long time. So hopefully, this will give you a little perspective. We're coming out with season 2 right now, which has Eric Yuan and Drew Houston and a whole bunch of other people talking about the same thing, helping give very practical advice on the stories you have not read about them when they actually went through whatever's happening to you. Can't close your lease because you don't have any money. You're running out of cash, whatever the story is. So if you have a chance, take a look. I'd love your feedback. Please let me know. And I'll end it there. I know I'm already over time. The big clock is blinking red. I just want to say thank you all very much. Congratulations. I know it's hard. You all have the best job in the world. And anything I can do to help, please get in touch. Thank you. Have a good day.